about almost everything. It seems to give way to distrust and frustration in the society. Perhaps the young minds or students are more prone to get entrapped in frustration and depression. The recent news of suicide by Bollywood actor Sushant Singh Rajput, allegedly under depression, has left almost everyone in shock. His suicide brings to the fore the dire need of a companion, a listener who can share and dispel our fears. Since books are known as the best companion, literature can play a very effective and therapeutic role in fighting against the depression, making us understand what we need to do and how we need to respond to the pandemic. Though my discipline is chemistry, yet the reading of novels, poems, and columns always give me a relief from the anxiety of the modern times, as well as provide clarity to my reactions to the situations. Besides this, literary studies help us to nourish the feelings of humility and solidarity engendered by the current situation. Few days back, I watched an American movie, Contagion, and was surprised to know how aptly the movie that was released in 2011 presents the current pandemic COVID-19 and its rapid spread. The movie also concerns the spread of virus transmitted by respiratory droplets and fomites, the attempts made by medical researchers and public health officials to identify and contain the disease, the loss of social order in pandemic, and the introduction of a vaccine to halt its spread. When I searched about the movies, I found that this movie is inspired by epidemics such as 2002 to 2004 SARS outbreak and 2009 flu pandemic. But what was astonishing is that how truly it relates to the current scenario, the way it sensitizes the audience about the precautions we need to take and the responsibilities and duties that we need to perform right now. This made me believe that literature, fiction, and films can be very powerful tools in our fight against this pandemic. I am thankful to our worthy resource persons who are renowned intellectuals in the literary field, Dr. Shivani Thakkar, Assistant Professor, Punjabi University, Patiala, and our very own Dr. Harpreet Kaur Garewal, Director, Insight Tutorial Services Canada, for sparing their precious time for us. I welcome you to the fraternity of Sri Guru Granth Sahib World University. I also congratulate the Department of English for organizing this webinar, and I hope that through this webinar, we will succeed in sensitizing our young generation about their role and responsibilities in the current situation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Your insights have been very fruitful, surely. Without taking any more time, I request our first guest speaker for the day, Dr. Harpreet Kaur Garewal, to kindly present her views on the topic, literature in the times of pandemic. Over to you, ma'am.
Hi there. Am I audible? Okay. So, hello everyone. As you all know, this is Harpreet. First of all, I would like to extend my thankfulness to the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Sri Guru Granth Sahib World University, Dr. Svraj Raj, former Head Department of English, Dr. Ankdeep Kaur Atwal, Head Department of English, and the entire faculty of Department of English for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on how literature helps us deal with pandemics. I feel so fortunate to have been a part of this wonderful team of teachers who have been working tirelessly to make the online system of education successful during these testing times. I congratulate the whole department for organizing this very significant and relevant webinar on literature in the times of pandemic. So before I was preparing for this talk, I called my dad to discuss this issue in detail. He is a very well-known story writer in Punjabi language. So he narrated a very beautiful anecdote to me, which was really relevant in these times. I would like to start my lecture with that anecdote. Hi there, is my voice audible?
You're audible now.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Sorry, I just got a couple of texts. Okay. So yeah, so I was going to share this folk story with you, but I tried to translate it in English, and I kind of lost the essence. So I'm going to narrate the story in Punjabi, and if anybody does not understand it, I could just just share it in English as well. So ਮੇਰੇ ਡੈਡੀ ਨੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਕੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਪਿੰਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਾ ਇੱਕ ਪਿੰਡ ਵੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਬਿਮਾਰੀ ਲੰਘੀ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕੋਈ, ਤੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਇੱਕ ਬੰਦਾ ਬੈਠਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਪਿੰਡ ਦਾ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਵੀ ਤੂੰ ਕੀ ਕਰਨ ਚੱਲੀ ਆ, ਤੇ ਬਿਮਾਰੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਪਿੰਡ 'ਚ ਕਰਪਸ਼ਨ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਵੱਧ ਗਈ, ਪਾਪ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਧ ਗਿਆ, ਤੇ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ 1000 ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਰਨ ਚੱਲੀ ਆ। ਤੇ ਉਹ ਬੰਦਾ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ, ਬਿਮਾਰੀ ਚਲੇ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ। And when she comes back, ਤੇ ਉਹ ਬੰਦਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛਦਾ ਕਿ sorry when it comes back, ਤਾਂ ਬੰਦਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛਦਾ ਕਿ ਕੀ ਗੱਲ, ਤੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਸੀ ਵੀ 1000 ਬੰਦਾ ਮਾਰਨਾ, ਪਰ ਤੂੰ ਤਾਂ 10000 ਬੰਦੇ ਮਾਰ ਕੇ ਆਈ ਆ, ਵੀ ਕੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਬਿਮਾਰੀ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਜਵਾਬ ਦਿੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ 1000 ਬੰਦੇ ਮਾਰੇ ਨੇ, ਬਾਕੀ 9000 ਬੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ ਡਰ ਨਾਲ ਮਰ ਗਏ, right? So I think it is this fear, this paranoia that literature helps us deal with by giving us multiple perspectives on life and things. It's often truly said that literature reflects life. I want to extend this statement by adding that literature also modifies our take on life. Whenever we read a piece of literature, it leaves many emotions and after effects on us, both optimistic and pessimistic. History bears testimony to the fact that humankind has witnessed many different kinds of calamities since times unknown. Those disasters, natural or man-made, turn life into an uncertain labyrinth. During such testing times, literature works as a medicine to soothe the mind and soul, as against the media that has done nothing but terrorize people and try to push them further into darkness in these times of COVID-19. On the other hand, literature reaffirms one's faith into the undying will of human race for survival. Perseverance of humankind is valued through literature. As Professor Harish Trivedi of Delhi University rightly points out, and I quote, literature regards each individual with passion and goes deeper than what statistical and historical records can tell us. Literature may not explain away or fight off things such as pandemics, even as modern science sometimes can't, but it does become a source of consolation, a way of sharing our common humanist concerns, and in its own way provides the deepest and most insightful record of the events, unquote. In his 2017 book, Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow, Yuval Harari contends that plagues are now largely a thing of the past, and they should be treated as such. I quote, he says, and I quote, both the incidence and impact of epidemics have gone down dramatically in the last few decades. This miracle is due to the unprecedented achievements of 20th century medicine, which has provided us with vaccinations, antibiotics, improved hygiene, and a much better medical literature, unquote. So literature presents numerous precedents about certain different, however similar kinds of diseases, such as the Black Death of 1346, American plagues of the 16th century, the Great Plague of London, 1665, flu epidemic, 1889, Indian plague of 1907, Spanish flu of 1918, Asian flu 1957, AIDS 1981 until the present, swine flu, African Ebola 2014. This list is not exhaustive. Such displays of previous epidemics in works of literature takes away the newness of the present disease, which in turn helps people feel secure because those works bear live testimony to the fact that humankind has been successful in fighting off all kinds of hardships that come their way. Some good works on the epidemics are The Plague by Albert Camus, Pox by Michael Welrich, The American Plague by Molly Caldwell Crosby, Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks, The Hot Zone by Richard Preston, and so on and so forth. Nonetheless, literature written from different angles and many different kinds of diseases all over the world presents diverse human responses. When one reads through literature and history of these diseases, the fight against epidemics and pandemics becomes universal at once. This somehow helps the people sail through the period with relative ease as they feel comfort in the fact that they are not alone in this. Whatever will happen to everyone as a whole. For instance, we all are facing difficulties and the same fate in times of COVID-19. And we feel we are all together in this. And literature is one of the things that binds us together. Literature also brings out the human traits of people to the foreground. They learn to empathize with their fellow beings. Literary examples set precedents of the ideal behavior on the parts of some people. I have taken one example of the novel Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks. It can be used as a prime example of such a humanistic attitude. Set in 1665, it draws on the true story of a tiny English village called Eyam during the bubonic plague. So during one of her visits to the English countryside, the novelist Brooks, she stumbled on the history when she noticed a sign pointing Plague Village. In the novel, it's such an interesting novel. So in the novel, the whole village gets affected with plague. The villagers discover that this disease is highly contagious. Brooks highlights the extraordinary action taken by the people of Eyam. They choose to self-quarantine so that the disease is contained inside the village. According to some historians, more than half of the population of the village died due to being infected with plague. This voluntary act of sacrificing their own lives in order to save the world from getting affected with the disease is a momentous moral choice. Brooks comments, and I quote, "It was a huge cost to the villagers because a lot of those might have survived if they had fled early in the outbreak. But on the other hand, that act of self-sacrifice meant that the plague did not spread beyond Eyam and into the surrounding communities, and so many thousands, perhaps, of lives were saved," unquote. Now, in times of COVID-19, we find ourselves at crossroads many a time. This novel makes us ponder over the question, who will I be in these hard times? Are we going to behave selfishly and fight our fellows to grab the last roll of toilet paper, or are we going to be the ones who leave a big bag of oatmeal at our neighbor's door anonymously? It is a moral and ethical challenge that the whole humankind is facing in these times. The literary pieces such as Year of Wonder help to solve the riddle a little and push us to choose the humane way. However, it is also very significant to note that not all literature written about the deadly diseases show the best face of humanity, as it is true for reality as well. One prime example is Daniel Defoe's A Journal of the Plague Year, published in 1772. The 1665 Great Plague of London had killed approximately 20% of the city's population. Defoe records a wonderful and holistic account of a community's response in the wake of a pandemic. Some people ran away and hid, especially the rich and the privileged class. Others hunker down and collect as much stuff as possible as they possibly can. Some people, on the other hand, live in denial until the plague knocks on their own door. Conmen, thieves, goons, and other such people of the society use the fear of people to create more unrest in the society. Some people become desperate and they do desperate things such as murder their own kith and kin, committing suicide, and lashing out at those who are allegedly responsible for the oncoming of the contagion. This stands true and relevant in the present scenario. We have witnessed all such kinds of behavior, all such kinds of behavior, from hoarding groceries to an escalation of racism against the Chinese community all over the world in the past few months. However, I would go to the extent of saying that such a realistic kind of portrayal of the human psyche and behavior also shows us the mirror of reality. It is when we see this kind of madness going around us that we can make a better sense of our own actions. Depiction of immoral and unethical human behavior could be a catalyst to check our own behavior. Just give me a second, please. Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron is a very significant work. Completed in 1353, it comprises 100 short tales told by a self-isolated group of 10 people in Florence, Italy, to save themselves from the Black Death of 1348. To kill away their time in quarantine, they agree to tell each other stories. In the present times, we have television, mobile phones, and many other recreational means to get us through the lockdown periods. However, in the late Middle Ages, the most significant source of entertainment and escaping the hard truths of epidemics was the oral tradition of storytelling. Reading Decameron or reading about it instills the faith that human nature is largely same all over the world. People tend to take relief in almost the same kinds of things in times of crisis. Testing situations often bring out the best and worst in people. A healthy balance becomes the need of the hour. Stories told by Boccaccio's characters not only make the time go faster for them, but also reassure them that the clouds of sadness will not remain forever, because the very nature of the narrative is relieving. Aristotle theorized that all stories have a beginning, middle, and an end. In a narrative, the crisis builds up and reaches its climax, but finally the things get resolved. The dust settles down, which reassures people's faith in the fact that this too shall pass. We are storytelling animals. Once the present crisis is over, we will all be able to tell the next generation the stories of coronavirus, just like our grandparents told us the stories of 1907 plague in India. Lastly, I would like to sum up my lecture by quoting John Donne's small poem, For Whom the Bell Tolls. It is actually the 17th meditation from John Donne's devotions. It is the 17th meditation from John Donne's devotions upon emergent occasions. It was published in 1623. He wrote this book when he was sick with a deadly disease and didn't see himself surviving out of it, but he survived. So here goes the poem. No man is an island, entire of itself. Each is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thine own or of thine friends were. Each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore, send not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. So two things to understand from this little piece. One, that the death is what unites us all. It is the common thread that ties us together. If someone else dies, the church bell not only tolls for them, but for us as well, for we will die too. Second, we need to create bridges of cooperation and reconcile if we want to make the best of life. The whole humanity is working together to fight anything that is evil will come out victorious. Before I go, I just want to read out a couple of stanzas from Dr. Surjit Patar's poem, J.I. Patchar. This is one of my favorite poems. Whenever there is anything, that goes wrong with my life or whatever, I just, take a reconciliation in the fact that it is just the Patchar. Patchar, as we all know, is autumn. So I believe that these times of COVID-19 are just the autumn of our life. This too will pass. Okay, so the poem is in Punjabi and, okay, so I'm just going to read a couple of stanzas out of this poem. जे आई पतझड़ ता फेर की है तू अगली रुत च यकीन रखी मैं लब के कित्यों लियाना कलमा तू फुल्लां जोगी जमीन रखी सो बेसिकली मैनूं लगदा कि आपां सारे आ जिहड़े आपां सारे कलमा ही आ राइट ते आपां सारिਆਂ ने फुल बन जाना है इट्स जस्ट दीस टाइम्स एंड द लास्ट वन गोज एज बुरे दिनां तो डरी ना पातर भले दिनां नूं लियावण खातर तू सिदक दिल विच ते आस रूह विच ते नजर च सुपने हसीन रखी. I think these are the three things that we really need in these desperate times. We just need not to be scared, and we need to keep sidak in our hearts and hope in our souls, and we need to keep dreaming of the happy days that will come over once these difficult times pass. And with this, I would like to sum up in lecture, and I would like to thank the department, especially Dr. Ankdeep Kaur Atwal, for giving me this opportunity to share some stuff with you. And okay, with this, I'll just get going. Keep safe, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Harpreet ma'am. We are thankful for your insights and inputs. And we shall take the questions and queries regarding your presentation, if any, after the second speaker's insights only. Our second speaker for the event is Dr. Shivani Thakkar from Punjab University, Patiala. We welcome you, ma'am. I request Dr. Shivani to kindly take over so as to present her views on the topic. Dr. Shivani Thakkar, please.
Thank you very much. I hope I am audible to everybody.
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, first of all, esteemed Vice Chancellor of the University, Dr. Pritpal Singh, the senior colleague and a guide, Dr. Sivraj Raj, Head Department of English, Shri Guru Granth Sahib World Sikh University, Dr. Ankdeep. A very good morning and Sat Shri Akal to all of you. I'm very thankful to the Department of English of the World Sikh University for giving me this opportunity to interact with people from different professions, different age groups, different backgrounds, to share our insights about what has been going on for more than 3-4 months in India. We will keep deliberating upon the issue, within the larger perspective, the role of literature in pandemics, in the times of pandemics, I was listening to what Dr. Pritpal had to say, and then also listened to what Dr. Garewal had to share. I agree that literature has a very subtle and a very different kind of an understanding to every human situation. Literature deals with things at a different level. Dr. Garewal mentioned one of the professors from Delhi University saying that literature treats people, as individuals, as human beings, not just as numbers, When she said it, I was reminded of a novel by Primo Levi, his autobiographical account of the Holocaust, where the inmates in one of the concentration camps, were given only numbers. So we are also too much bamboozled by the beginning numbers, are we not? Whenever you switch on your television set or touch the screen of your mobile phone, in the name of information, we are becoming confused. How many numbers can a human mind process? How do we make sense of the situation, where the clock is ticking all the time? It's running on your screen, and we are not able to make sense. I think 3 months back, when it all started, initially we were very engaged, keeping a track on how many cases, where, which part of the world, how many have contracted, how many have died, how many have recovered, what is happening where. Gradually, I think 3 months down the line, 5 months down the line, the faculties are going numb. We are no longer able to make any sense out of these numbers. So I am reminded of one of his poems, which was shared to me a few days back by Dr. Sivraj, where he said about the migrant laborers that a dot on the graph. But I was thinking, why only a migrant laborer? Are we all not just dots on the graphs? How does it matter? I am here today, I am not here the next morning, the world goes on. So what I've been forced to think is that in these times of information, how this information needs to be converted, squeezed into knowledge, and then further developed into wisdom. Wisdom, I believe, as Dr. Garewal was talking, that how literature, can bring peace, can bring a sense of acceptance, and finally a great deal of wisdom, which is becoming an obsolete, phenomena these days of instant communication. We have Twitters, we have Facebooks and whatnot, where we are sharing things. I'm not questioning, I'm not demeaning their value, but I also wonder how much depth do we think we can bring into our responses, through these instant means, So in this instant means of technology, and I think I just forgot one more thing, which I should have. I am extremely grateful to the team of English department for exposing somebody like me to the technology. I am not very proficient with the use of technology here, but let's get back to the literature. So how is literature going to help us attain that level of profundity, that level of acceptance, that level of dealing with the underlying human condition, which is common to us all? So if we bypass all the questions, which I just mentioned, how many have migrated, what is happening on the trade footing, which country is doing what, I think all these things can be put aside, and we need not mention them because we all are pretty well versed with them with the click of a finger. But largely, if we say in this scenario, which looks very grim, I think the major issue which is haunting us all, I think maybe I can say it, some of us can say it, but majority, perhaps we cannot completely step into the shoes of the people who have been rendered out of jobs, who have lost their sources of income because of the extended lockdown, shutting down of the industries. I think there has to be something, which can soothe them. And I do not know how potent, our talks are, but at least I think these talks can become very, very potent tools of making humans out of all of us. I think we should stop caring for numbers. As long as we stop caring for numbers, let's take care of the smaller numbers, me and my family and my neighbors, my friends, my local society, and the larger numbers will take care of themselves. So we have to translate this information into a knowledge, how it is affecting mental, emotional health. Now again, mental, emotional health, is something of a taboo in our society. We are not supposed to share emotions. We are not supposed to share. Anybody who shares, it can be within a close family or a circle of friends, but sharing publicly, was restricted. So I was reminded of, the champion of expression, which I call the person who started bringing it to the fore was Aristotle, who said, in contrast to what his teacher, what his mentor Plato said, that all kinds of emotions should be banished from his ideal republic, that emotions make people weak. That's why he did not give any place to the poet in his ideal republic. But Aristotle, in response to his mentor's view, proposed that it is important for all of us to have a catharsis. He says it's good for people to watch drama and allow an outlet to their pent-up emotions. So carrying on from where we have come a long way ahead, now, and also thanks to the celebrities, who are promoting the cause of mental, emotional health. After all, this world, which has been through so many pandemics and epidemics, as Madam Garewal mentioned, just a little piece of information, that we have first recorded history of pandemic dating back to 5000 BC in China. They recovered some of the remains in 2014. And after that, Antonine plague, Justinian plague, Black Death, and a number of such epidemics and pandemics, cholera and smallpox and HIV and Ebola, whatnot, I think epidemics and pandemics have killed more people than the wars have killed, The Spanish flu, which was called Spanish but killed the maximum people in India. What these pandemics and what these epidemics, in fact, what disease at any level, what pestilence of any degree, instills in the mind of an individual is to be addressed. Mental health, emotional health in these times, is utterly important, When we are, a few days back only, I came across an article about Princeton University, which is offering a course on medicine and literature. And these people, a group of young adults, are sharing on one such online platform their insights about how they are grappling with the issue. If we come to specific contribution of literature and literary artists, I think literature or literary artist does not influence the situation, does not alter the situation the way medicines and medical practitioners do, but therapeutic value of literature cannot be undermined. There is always an intervention which is indirect in nature, but literary work functions at more than one level, Outwardly, superficially, it narrates you a story. But through that story, it does so many things. We all know literature is allegorical in nature, Through that individual's story, it foregrounds certain other related issues, like how the situation reveals callousness of the system and the subtle characteristics of human nature, positive as well as negative. Finally, through all this, through individual stories and commentaries on social and individuals, literature dwells upon the ultimate question, that is the human condition. What are we destined to face, irrespective of all kinds of differences of gender, class, caste, When disease strikes, it considers no discrimination at all. We are all bound to go through that circle from birth to death of struggles, disease, growing up, and whatnot, And since ages, writers have been grappling with the issue of death, annihilation, fear of total destruction of human race, apocalypse caused by a virus, a pandemic. India also has a very rich tradition of literature which addresses the issue of pandemic. Special mention should be made of Rabindranath Tagore, whose old poem, Puratan Vritya, the old man-servant, narrates the story of a servant who cures his master to health, who was suffering from a pandemic. And eventually, while taking care of him, he succumbs to the virus and dies. Does it not remind us of the n number of health workers who are, fighting the disease on our behalf? When we listen that 100-odd doctors lost their life only in Italy, and a day before yesterday only, a number of nurses were tested positive in Patiala. It is happening all around. But what is literature helping us to do here is, it is telling us their stories. Every individual, every affected person, every death has a story to tell, We should not dismiss them just as another number, We need to listen to those stories, and that listening will develop empathy. And after Rabindranath Tagore, we have a long list of Hindi writers, who have taken up this issue of pandemic. There has been Prem Chand in one of his stories. Then there has been Suryakant Tripathi, who is known as Nirala, a very famous Hindi poet who lost half of his family to the plague of 1918. And then we have Ahmad Ali in Twilight in Delhi. And then we have Fakir Mohan Senapati. He is an Orient writer, and Shiva Shankar Pillai. All these writers have brought up the issue of pandemic and related agony. But through these individual stories, what these people are trying to do is to bring forth the common. Ahmad Ali, in his novel Twilight in Delhi, talks about the corruption that such a pandemic can bring about. I think we are paying a little less attention to this factor, that how it is corrupting human minds. Of course, I am not undermining the goodness of human beings, but we have to be very, very aware, and we have to protect our souls from getting into that kind of a situation, He says, I have seen people, I have seen thieves stealing the sheets from the graveyard, the sheets in which the dead bodies were wrapped. And he says the grave diggers are doing a callous job. They are not digging the graves properly just because perhaps they have so many graves to dig, But I think this reminds me of Albert Camus' Plague, in which the doctor, the chief protagonist, talks about the decency. I think जो बड़ा काम है लिटरेचर का, हमारे को ये याद करवाना कि जो हमने काम करना है, that has to be done with a sense of decency, neither with hope nor with despair. क्योंकि ये situations हैं which are reminders to the human soul. These are the situations, in which we have to be realistic. We have to be, cautious. We have to safeguard our own souls, not just bodies, from sliding into a pit of corruption. So very, very subtly, Ahmad Ali brings around the moral and the systematic corruption that the system, gets indulged in. When we talk about Western literature, it also has a very long tradition of dealing with the pandemics. Two very famous ancient texts, Homer's Iliad and Oedipus Rex by Sophocles, both start with the mention of the plague. One more thing I want to share here is that plague is a very, very recurrent motif in all literature, and plague is not just one disease. Eventually, it has become a motif which refers to any kind of human condition, to which we are vulnerable. It can be anything. It can be a plague, it can be an HIV virus, it can be a COVID-19, it can be anything. But when we talk about these ancient writings by Homer and by Oedipus Rex, where the plague has hit their cities and number of people are dying from it, there is a religious connection to it. And our religions, Hinduism and Sikhism, especially Buddhism, which promotes existentialism, These literary works remind us that these are the punishments, you know, which an individual can be subjected for the wrongdoings of their leaders. Even in the first one, the Homer, it is the misdeeds of King Agamemnon, and in Sophocles, it is the unknowns, you know, unknowingly committed sin by the Oedipus, you know, of incest when he married his own mother, but he didn't know about it. But here, it is the theme of sin and punishment that is highlighted in these texts, you know. Gradually, literature, you know, when it became more liberal, with the advent of Renaissance, authors started dealing with the theme in a slightly different way, as Dr. Garewal mentioned about Boccaccio's Decameron, in which people are resorting to storytelling to talk about issues like love, morality, ethics, power, trade, politics. So all those issues have been dealt with in detail by different characters. This is a group of 10 people who have holed up, self-quarantined in a villa, you know, and talking about certain issues. This also sounds very, very contemporary. Then we have another 19th century Italian writer, Alessandro Manzoni. Alessandro Manzoni, in his novel The Betrothed, also deals with the theme of pandemic, the bubonic plague of the 17th century, which killed hundreds of millions of people. This, he says, was caused by the people who were sent by the devil to grease the frames of people's door with an infection. This again sounds very, very familiar. We are washing hands and cleaning hands with the sanitizer. Your hands can grease the surfaces, you know, you can catch disease and then it's all over. And in the beginning of the 12th century, a very important piece of literature that deserves mention here is The Scarlet Fever, written in 1912 by an American socialist novelist, Jack London. Jack London's novel is very, very interesting in the sense that it is set in 2063 and narrates an incident of plague, of a pandemic, which he calls red fever, which hundreds and thousands of people lost their lives. This epidemic took place in 2013, which is not very far. तो 2013 में एक एपिडेमिक हुआ जिसका जिक्र 2063 में जाके हुआ और वहां पे हमारे पास जो प्रोटैगनिस्ट है वो एक डिस्ट्रॉयड डिवास्टेटेड वर्ल्ड में बैठा हुआ है. He is addressing his young grandsons who have become near savages. So what can epidemics do to us? They can take us back to those levels of consciousness, you know. That's why I said it is important, and literature plays a very important role in safeguarding our consciousness. So यहाँ पे जो वो जिक्र करता है, he paints a very, very gory picture of the things, you know, that happen. He says initially, when the pandemic hit, the Red Death hit, people were very, very careless. They said, no, it's nothing. The authorities were very, very casual in their approach. They said, no, nothing is going to happen because we have a lot of faith in our biologists and in our scientists. You know, they are going to find a vaccine soon. But public faith soon starts dwindling as the numbers start going up, you know. Then people run away from city life towards villages. And when they run towards the villages, what they are doing is they are carrying the disease with them. So virus is spreading at a great speed, decomposing bodies strewn here and there, released germs, you know, which infected further people. The doctors started getting affected, they started dying. So the entire civilization is on the brink of falling apart. Another factor which Jack London's novel brings to the fore, which is very, very contemporary in spirit, is the role of media. He says that media in those days was limited to newspapers and a little bit of cable, you know, or telephone. But he says that media's role was generally positive in those days. And it can be seen in contrast to the some of media's role these days, which is not only helping us to keep us aware of the situation, but also spreading false news and also, giving rise to some kind of hatred among communities. As Dr. Garewal mentioned, that how Chinese community is becoming a target. This is one aspect which I would like to talk later on, that how certain communities become targets. In the 1980s, when HIV started spreading, the entire focus was on the Africans, as if it was they who deliberately created the disease. Now we are, wondering whether it came from the wet market of the Wuhan or whether it came from a lab. These are the fears, about pestilence, about, end of everything which we foresee, and we have started envisioning a biological warfare among the superpowers. So we have to think about all these issues, Then what Jack London does, in addition to the role of media, is also highlighting the role of bureaucracy and the policymakers, the politicians, the power-hungry, who think about the loss of revenue at the cost of human life. I was wondered when I heard that one of the biggest temples in India gave a statement that we have lost 400 million rupees in revenue. I was wondering, how is a religious place talking of revenues? The commerce has, overpowered the minds of all of us in such a way. And literature can be a very, very strong reminder of these things, that we all are equally followers. Then Dostoevsky in Crime and Punishment also explains how the Russians are vulnerable to an Asian pandemic which can enter Russia. And then there is another very important text by Leo Tolstoy, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. This is a story of a person who dies because of the callous and very careless attitude of his family and friends and colleagues. Colleagues are wondering who would be promoted when he dies. So we are all thinking about everything in material terms. And Tolstoy wants to remind us that we all need to play a very, very vital role if we have to get out of this situation. Role of family and role of local community in showing how the near and dear ones, cannot only be saved by the medicine. Counseling and love and affection shown by the people closer to you is extremely important. Then I need to mention, I would like to mention two major poets, modern poets of 20th century, T.S. Eliot in The Wasteland and W.B. Yeats in The Second Coming, also referring to the plague. These two people had personal encounters with plague. W.B. Yeats, had his wife who was carrying their child being exposed to the virus, and T.S. Eliot also had a personal experience, and he has talked about the impact, the mental, emotional impact that the virus had on his lives, And when I think many of us have read The Wasteland, and we are all aware of the kind of climate he creates. Because the poet would never say the thing directly. He creates a climate of fogs, corpus-haunted landscape, a scene of living death. And another very important author who has narrated her own story, Pale Horse, Pale Riders, is Catherine Ann Porter. She says how the pandemic divided my life, and it took me a long time to go out and live in the world all again. So in the times where normalcy does not seem to be returning anytime soon, I think this experience of COVID-19 is going to lead to a paradigm shift, where you can talk about things before and after, how we used to live and interact before COVID and how we will live and how we will interact after COVID-19, you know, is going to be a thing to be seen, you know. But I think any reference to literature is incomplete without mention of one of the greatest novels of 20th century, The Plague, by the French Algerian author Albert Camus. Camus is a known absurdist, existentialist, you know, who talks about a plague which has spread from animals to humans, killing 50% of the population of a small town called Oran. But he says that it is because these people are living denatured, money-centered lives. Now, this was written in 1947. We are almost 75 years, you know, ahead of that. And he said, as I mentioned earlier also, not about one plague, but about the overall human condition. Camus says that these pandemics are concentrations of a universal precondition that all human beings are vulnerable to random extermination at any point of time. So we all are living with a plague, you know, we are all vulnerable to extermination, random death, you know, anytime. It might be a plague, it might be a pandemic, it might be an accident, it might be any other disease. So here also, he says people are not ready to accept. It sounds very contemporary. After all, he says we are modern people, we have telephones, we have jets, you know, and we can anytime fly to the safer places. One character says it cannot be plague. Everyone knows it has vanished in the West. Another says, yes, everyone knows except for the dead. Only the dead know that the plague has not vanished. So it's not just the plague, you know, plague means any kind of pandemic, you know, or any kind of human situation which is subjecting us to the you know, cynical control of nature, I would say. So when it comes to death, I think history hasn't progressed much. We were as vulnerable to death ever as we are at this point of time. There is no escape from the frailty of human life. So what I think literature reminds us of is doing our job with the decency, neither with hope and nor with a lot of despair. You know, we have to detach ourselves from the situation, keep doing what we can do to our best, because Camus says plagues never die. They wait patiently in our bedrooms, in our cellars, in our trunks, in our hankies, in our old papers, you know. He knew wherever we can catch an infection from. And he says, and one fine day, it will rouse its rats and send them to die in a well-contented city. Besides this, Madam Garewal mentioned a lot of other literary texts, but a few more I would like some of us, if we can read Mary Shelley's very important book, The Last Man, where she talks about the last man who has survived the apocalypse, and Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, Gabriel Garcia Marquez' Love in the Times of Cholera, and Stephen King's The Stand. So we have a number of literary texts, you know, which talk about the issue, and you know, which kind of bring up so many existential issues, that why were we born, what is the purpose of life, you know. So yes, philosophical insights, but in the practical life, I think the key is the doctor's word, that decency in dealing with the situation. I would like to read out 2 lines from Dr. Siraj's poem. Spawned by the virus, rumor and humor rhyme and unite to kill time with those who have known time for the first time. I think the word time resonates quite a few times in the last 2 lines of this, in the last 2 lines of these 2 stanzas, and I think this younger generation of ours, you know, will have a very special relationship with time, when they have plenty of time and they can choose how to spend this time. One little dimension of the issue, you know, which I must point out, that how language plays a role. We have very conveniently named these diseases as, especially the present one, Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus. There is a lot of politics being played. There is a lot of trade politics being played around the name. Chinese are being cornered in all parts of the globe, because the virus originated there. But how it spreads, I think we are all in some way or the other, as Jack London says, that spread of capitalism is responsible for spread of these diseases also. Then we see Spanish flu. Why did we call it Spanish flu when India lost maximum number of people? But it was perhaps because Spain had a free press during the World War, and they were perhaps the first ones to, reveal the numbers. So that's why it was called Spanish flu. So the thing is how language affects psychology. Chinese, Spanish, Ebola, Zika, HIV, everything originating from Africa. So I think it is time when we have to accept these episodes as biological events which could originate anywhere in the world. It could be India, it could be my town, it could be your town, it could be your village. So in these times when we are squeezing into being a global village, I think we all need to own the responsibility, and we have to treat these diseases as biological entities, and we have to fight against this invisible enemy together, without pointing out at people with a specific accent or with specific facial features, that these are the people who are responsible, and we have to remain positive about it. Yesterday only I had a short anecdote shared by one of my friends, about an incident in the life of the famous author Franz Kafka. This is कैफ्का के को एक लड़की मिली जिसके पास एक छोटी सी गुड़िया थी. उस लड़की की गुड़िया जो थी वो गुम हो गई, और वो लड़की जो थी वो रोई जा रही थी. She was inconsolable without her doll. Kafka could not tolerate, and what he did was he said, your doll is gone somewhere. कहीं चली गई है, और उसने चिट्ठियां लिखनी शुरू कर दी उस लड़की को that your doll has gone on a world tour and she's writing letters to you from every place. और वो उसको हर जगह से चिट्ठी लिखती है, और वो लड़की जो है उसको पढ़ती है, और she is satisfied that her doll will return. And someday what happens is Kafka buys a new doll and gives it to that girl, and she says that, no, this is not my doll, and he says, no, it's your doll, it has changed. And the doll writes a letter, and when Kafka dies after that, after gifting that doll, Kafka dies. And once, and that little girl, finds out a small letter written inside that doll, that we all love our near and dear ones, our friends, our family. We all need to take care of them. But the world goes on, It is love in all form, love which has been prescribed by all of the religious literature, religious texts, that is the remedy that the literature suggests, we have to love our fellow human beings, and hope is eternal. Though literature does paint a grim picture of the scenario, but literature also shows hope, Despite everything, there has always been a resurgence, and we have to look forward to the resurgence and look at the positive side of literature, which would come to our soothing, to our catharsis in these testing times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for your valuable views. I thank both our speakers for their valuable views. Their responses and readings have definitely added to our understanding of the topic. However, the webinar cannot be said to be complete without an interactive session. We have had quite a number of questions and queries from our speakers and participants today. However, due to limited time period that we have, it is not possible for us to cater to each and every question. So I will be reading out a few to be answered by our guest speakers. However, unfortunately, Dr. Harpit Garewal is not there with us anymore as she had to leave for some urgent work. So the questions will be asked to Dr. Shivani Thakkar only. Ma'am, should I begin with the questions?
Please.
Yeah, just give me a minute, ma'am.
Sure.
Ma'am, this first question has been asked by Gurmeet Kaur. She says, how can we motivate the students to read more literature when they are too occupied in online classes already? Please suggest some ways to cater to this particular problem.
My humble suggestion would be that literature is very, very important, but it is up to the teacher and up to the innovative ways a teacher can devise to share literary insights. Not necessarily, to be very honest, in these crunching times, when when you ask a student to read a literary text. वेरी ऑनेस्टली हमारे यहाँ पे हम ये भी मान के चलते हैं कि बच्चों ने कंप्यूटर साइंस की असाइनमेंट भी करनी है, बायोलॉजी की भी करनी है, केमिस्ट्री की भी करनी है, और सबके लिए लिटरेचर को हम कैसे एक्सेसिबल और जो है एंटरटेनिंग बनाएं, वो टीचर पे डिपेंड करता है. वी कैन शेयर some anecdote, a few lines of the poem here and there, we can connect things, with chemistry, we can connect things with political science, we can connect things with everything, especially in the times of technology, it's very, very important. क्योंकि जहाँ पे फिजिकल जो है जो एसोसिएशन है वो पॉसिबल नहीं है, हम डायरेक्टली जो है नहीं स्टूडेंट्स को एड्रेस कर पाते कई बार, तो मुझे लगता है टीचर के लिए बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट है कि बीच बीच में रुक के जब कोई सिचुएशन आती है तो रिफ्लेक्ट करें. I think reflection is very important. You should encourage your students to reflect more. अगर सारी किताब नहीं पढ़ सकते, give them a few lines, tell them a story. I think literature के साथ connection is more important rather than going into the form of literature. कि आप पूरी text पढ़ रहे हो कि नहीं, आपको poem समझ आ रही है कि नहीं. You should share the essence what literature is trying to do.
Right,
and managing
thank
time,
you so much.
Managing time is up to all of us, I think हमारे पास time बहुत भी हो गया because we are saving on traveling and lot many other things.
That's right, ma'am. Thank you so much for your observation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ma'am, the second question is from a very young scholar, Swati Syal. She wants to know the name you mentioned in the very beginning of the lecture about the poem that you associated discussing with Dr. Savrajad. The name wasn't audible to her.
A dot on the graph.
The very first poem, ma'am.
Yeah. Yes. I think Dr. Suraj has given it the title, A Dot on a Graph. Are we not just dots on the graphs, moving up and down, Dr. Savraj, I think, wrote in specific context with the migrants and the people dying on railway tracks, I am reminded of absurdism, how an individual is just a dot on a graph, it is just a number. That's where literature comes to the rescue, it gives importance to your individual tale, to your emotion. But how by capitalism we have been reduced to a dot on the graph.
Right, ma'am. Thank you so much. Ma'am, in the same lieu, even Dr. Savraj has asked a question to you. He says, Dear Dr. Shivani, this pandemic is not a usual thing. To me, in India, the defining images of the pandemic are those of the migrants trudging back to their homes, the home they had earlier left for greener pastures. Grief is also being monetized in the form of new anthologies of poetry, the media gone berserk for TRPs.
Yeah.
What will be the place of literature being churned out today in the history of literature?
I think it's the time, Dr. Savraj, literary people assume more responsibility. We have to get above We are not commercial people, we are not looking for TRPs, we are not looking for recognition. I think the role that a literary artist as well as a teacher of a literary work is concerned, I think we have to assume subtler roles, explaining the human condition. Yes, capitalism, we all know, does not mind selling anything, even if it is death. How, I was wondered how media has been cashing on the death of Sushant Singh Rajput, and before that, deaths by of two other TV artists. One of them was from Punjab, Manmeet Garewal, and there was another girl, another TV artist girl. So when everything is being sold and bought, I do not know. I came across a very disturbing trend, when I got to know about some of the betting episodes in a town called Rajpura, and they said they were betting on how many people will die of corona. Now there is a betting on it. So human mind can go astray in such times. The rich will have their own outlets, partying and clubbing and drinking and gambling. The poor will have their minds diverted. They lose faith. The biggest risk is of losing faith in these times, especially when religion has already, lost that place of being the direction provider. I think it was very well thought by Matthew Arnold that literature will replace religion. So I think our role is like very, very difficult in these days. We have to guide people with care. We have to handle them with a lot of care. Psyches are hurt. Especially these people, who have lost their jobs and money and who have been rendered rootless, that sense of homelessness in home, which they would have never expected, that sense of alienation. We need to protect them. We need to hug them. We need to love them all. I think that's the best a literary artist can do or a teacher can do to create that higher sense of awareness among people.
That's right, ma'am. That answer another question that somebody by the name of Vishwas Seni has asked. He said, as you have already said in both the lectures, that literature helps us to accept whatever happens. But somebody of such a high intellect as Sushant Singh Rajput was also reading books. He was an avid reader. Even then, he could not come out of this dilemma. How do we convince our students? I guess you have already answered that, ma'am.
Yes. I think here comes the role of society also. Here comes the role of community. And this is where, we are sitting on an edge, We have to create a very fine balance between technology, which is bridging the gap between people, but at the same time, the importance of human contact. So I think what is missing has to be addressed very, very carefully. I think that's where, minds can go astray. These things need to be accepted, and, help should be sought. I believe we have to proactively seek help if we are in distress. Why not?
Right, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for addressing to all the queries.
Thank you.
Well, now it's time to wind up the seminar. I am really grateful to both our guest speakers for today for making this event a success. Now I request my dear colleague, Ms. Jasprit Kaur, Assistant Professor, Department of English, to take over and present a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Jasprit. Thank you, Baljeet ma'am. Good afternoon to the Honorable Vice Chancellor of the University, Dr. Pritpal Singh ji, Dr. Suraj Raj, our invited speakers, Head of the Department of English, faculty members from the university, participants from across the world, and my dear students. It's my pleasure to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. I, Jasprit Kaur, on the behalf of the Department of English, Shri Guru Granth Sahib World University, first of all, would like to thank our worthy Vice Chancellor of the University, Dr. Pritpal Singh ji, for motivating and helping us in organizing this webinar. On the behalf of the entire university, I would like to thank Dr. Shivani Thakkar for sparing her valuable time for us and presenting her views on how literature helps us in dealing with such sensitive issues that largely affect our lives. I thank you, ma'am. My next thank goes to our another invited speaker, though she is not here, but to Dr. Harpreet Kaur, who was once my colleague and still my very good friend, for sparing time for us and sharing her valuable views on today's theme. Thank you, Harpreet ma'am. A very hearty thanks goes to our former head of the Department of English, Dr. Suraj Raj, for gracing the event with his presence. My heartfelt gratitude goes to our head of the Department of English, Dr. Ankdeep Kaur, for organizing this wonderful webinar. I would also like to thank Dr. Shruti, Assistant Professor from the Department of Computer Engineering, and Rajbir Sir for the technical supervision. I would also like to thank all the teachers from the various departments of the university for taking part in the webinar. Last but not the least, a big thanks to all the participants and our students for enthusiastically participating in the event and making this event a huge success. Once again, I thank you everybody. I thank you all. Stay home, read more, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.